Hello everyone, this is Matt from Real World Review, and today we're going to be replacing the screen on the iPad Pro 11-inch. This should work for the first, second, and third generation, though the third generation might have a few different screws in different places. But ultimately, it's going to be the same type of video. One thing to note is that the first and second generation have the same exact screen, while the third generation has a different screen. So the tools you're going to need are going to be a PH000 bit, a plastic pick, a razor blade, a playing card, and some adhesive. You will also need some heat and some glue as well. So the first thing you want to do is power off the device if you can, and then you want to start heating up the edges just a little bit so then you can get a razor blade inside there, and then just use a playing card to cut through the adhesive. If you're trying to preserve the screen, you only want to go in about a centimeter because there is very little holding the screen down. But ultimately, if you heat around the screen while applying pressure, lifting up the screen, the adhesive should start to separate. Again, if you're trying to preserve the LCD, be very careful with this. There are a few cables attaching the screen, so when you do loosen it up, you don't want to lift it up immediately. All you want to do is just make sure that the screen moves a little bit. So pretty much just go around using heat and using a blade to kind of separate the screen, and like I said, use a playing card to cut through the adhesive. And I kind of cleaned up this little area. It's actually really easy to remove the glass if there are any glass shards stuck on the iPad. But ultimately, once you lift up the screen, you want to kind of shimmy it down like this, making sure not to tear any cables. And then you want to grab the PH000 bit and carefully remove this screw on the top and remove the screw on the bottom and carefully remove this little panel, remembering exactly how it goes. Even though there's only a few screws in this device, you definitely want to make sure you keep them in order and remember how everything goes. Next, you want to get a pick and carefully lift up that connector. Then you want to flip the screen over to the left side so you can expose where that screen plugs in. You want to remove these 3 screws. Again, on the third generation, there's going to be a few more screws. And then this panel will lift up. Then you want to unscrew the battery and carefully apply a pick in between the battery area. You don't want to get under the pins like I did. I've just done this many times, so I know for sure how to get it under there without damaging those pins. Apparently, it's very easy to damage those pins, and if you didn't know that, you definitely will not know how to replace those. So to save yourself some time, make sure not to put it under those pin areas. Just put it above the pin, and you only need very little space to separate the battery from the logic board. And if you're asking, why should I do this? It's because you don't want to short out anything. After we do that, we can unplug all 4 of those display cables, and then we can compare with the new screen. Sometimes it'll come with all those display cables, other times it's just going to come with the digitizer cables like mine did. So we want to separate that cable, lift it up a little bit, and then we want to do the same thing on our screen, except we want to remove these 2 screws that are holding in this little metal panel. Remove that metal panel and unplug the display cables, remembering how they go, even though there's only one way for them to be plugged in. Put those on the new screen. Put those 2 screws and that panel back on, and then we can set this cable back down. Next, what we want to do is separate this little cable assembly, and carefully we want to cut through the adhesive so we can loosen it up from the screen for these 2 sensor areas. Pretty much what I'm doing is shaving it off the display so then I don't damage these cables. Once you do that, there's a little bit of adhesive holding this cable down. We can kind of loosen it up until it gets to the middle. Then we can do the same thing with these front sensors, including that microphone. Again, same thing, kind of cutting into the display rather than giving the chance of damaging that cable. And then all you got to do is just loosen that up and it should lift out with a little bit of adhesive holding it back. Next, we grab the new screen. We can remove all these protectors and then kind of line everything up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put glue around this piece. It is clear, so I could just kind of set it on the front, but I chose not to on this one. But all you want to do is line that up and kind of add a little bit of pressure for a few seconds. Then you want to do the same thing on the other side, as well as the proximity sensor and the microphone area. Set that back in. And personally, I just let that sit on the table. You can add a little bit of pressure, like if you want to put like a book or something on top of it to hold it in place, but you shouldn't really need that. Next, we're going to remove these little magnets, which are set in place perfectly. So you want to make sure to set them on the new screen, pretty much in the same place as well. There is some adhesive that goes on that, so if you do keep the adhesive, make sure to just line it up properly. But if not, you might have to apply a little bit of adhesive or maybe even a little bit of that glue to make sure that this stays in place. And yes, you want to line this up properly or else you could crack the screen. So that's why I'm using the other one as a guide. Then you want to do the same thing on the bottom. And while the glue is curing, I'm just going to kind of cut through all this adhesive and remove it from the frame so then it's kind of flat. So then when I add new adhesive, it will just work fine. On some of the screens that I'm getting now, it already comes with adhesive, so that should be fine. But in the situation that you don't have adhesive on your screen, I'm going to show you how to do that. Pretty much all you want to do is just set it down like this and just cut using the frame to kind of line it up properly. I don't recommend cutting it and then setting it onto the iPad. It's always been a difficult thing for me, so I just do it this way. But whatever works for you will work for you. And you pretty much want to do this all around the frame. Just make sure to cut out the areas for the front camera, and then everything else should be fine. So once everything's set for a little bit, what we're going to do is we're going to plug in the display cables, all 4 of them, and then we're going to loosen up this battery, put in that screw, and then set the panel back on and put in those 3 screws. Again, there might be more screws if you have the 3rd generation iPad, but either way, this is how you do it. And then you want to carefully move the screen down like this so we can plug in that top cable. This is very difficult and very annoying, so obviously it's not as easy as I'm making it look. But either way, once you get that going, you set down that little panel, put in those 2 screws, and then we're pretty much ready to install this screen. So you want to test it, try the touchscreen, and it looks like everything's working. So what we'll do is we'll peel off the adhesive on all parts, and then we'll set this down. Personally, I don't have a specific way that I set it down. I just make sure that the corners are lined up and then apply pressure on the rest of the display. Sometimes people use glue, other times the adhesive doesn't really work as well. If you want to apply pressure or add clamps, you can feel free to do that. On this iPad, you can actually see it's a little bit bent where the pen gets charged. So that one's fun. But that's pretty much it. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and hopefully this video helped you out. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section. And as always, thanks for watching.